Spuhler McCabe has served the National Capital Presbytery in DC for 19 years. And recently she's been the site coordinator for the DC Young Adult Volunteer Program. She's served a number of congregations at the Presbytery, but recently she's been for the last 3 years at Faith Presbyterian Church. And then simultaneously, she's served the Presbytery at large as the leadership coach and church assessment tool interpreter, mouthful, for individuals and groups seeking to be in relationship with their communities as the larger body of Christ. So today, Tara is going to talk to us about community-based development opportunities such as affordable housing and other ways that congregations can consider growing spiritually and becoming mission partners with new worshiping communities, intercultural fellowships, as they are discerning their next steps. So Tara, thank you for joining us and helping us better understand what we can do.
Great. Thank you for that intro. I'm very happy to be here. I'll let you know, this is probably the first time, I would say, since the pandemic that my office, we've been able to do our attempt at offering a comprehensive look at tools and best practices of what it means to be a missional, pastoral, and prophetic congregation in our presbytery, with the pandemic, with our new reality, with who we are now as congregations and communities in the presbytery. Since the pandemic, this office and our presbytery and different committees of our presbytery, we have been constantly engaging with individual congregations, with their mission teams, or with their worship teams, or with their newly created what does evangelism look like for us these days kind of teams. And we've been doing all these moments and pieces. And now I realized it's time for us to kind of move forward confidently with each other's help and grace about what are some of the strongest practices we now have recognized and been cultivating with one another. So I'm going to let you know, this is a little bit of a guinea pig kind of Sunday school class. It's putting together all the pieces and elements that are all over the place. And it's going to be something that you already have I'm going to say a spinal cord with this. I just heard you're doing listening sessions on a capital campaign. That means that y'all have already gone through a team of discernment of what's possible, what's next, what's necessary, and you're also still engaging with a listening practice, an active listening practice, right? That's a tool that I'm going to lift up in this class, and it's something that I want to make sure people realize it's happening inside as important as it is to make sure it's happening outside, okay? So why don't we just start? And we'll see where we go. I will definitely have time for check-in questions, and then get your pen and paper ready maybe, because this is a PowerPoint presentation. So we'll be able to provide the content for sure later on if you want it, but also just get a pen and paper ready to write down, because you're going to be invited to maybe come up with your own thoughts or your own lists with some of these tools and practices that we do. Okay? Can we open with prayer? God, you are in the midst and with us everywhere. Continue to enliven our eyes, our ears, our hearts, and our minds, so that when we encounter you, we recognize not only the grace and the love and the welcome, we are also equipped and sent to share your good news. Amen. Being church today, go ahead and recognize what's different, what's the same. And we start with today, because many of us come to this conversation of being church, being a relevant church. We might carry 15 years ago, 30 years ago. I'm sure each of you have been a member with this particular congregation at different times. I'd be so curious for you all to share with each other. If you can, put in the chat just how many years each of you have been a member at OPMH. If you just even started with that, and recognize the different starting places that each of you bring to this table of being church now today. We have some arcs of what we know is different today for organizing churches. In my work right now with the Presbytery, it is recognizing a new study has even just come out. It's recognizing that while the base mission of the church is never going to change, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but how we do it, how we are presenting ourselves as the body of Christ in the world today, we have got to constantly be adapting, not to make sure it's not authentically who we are, but who we are as a church. Is it authentically being understood or connecting? And so just to arc the umbrella, you all saw, maybe read or heard on the radio or in the paper when the new Gallup poll came out. And for the first time ever, the percentage of those organized members of an organized religion, it's gone, what was it? It was like the highest percentage ever since they've been taking that test, is now people are saying they're not part of an organized religion. And that was like, oh, well, we've known that. And frankly, in the United States, that decline has been going on for a while. It was just a higher percentage jump within a shorter period of time. But that's been going on since, some will say, 1930s, even 1950s. While that's been going down, did you also catch what percentage and stat was going up? Anybody know? Do you want to say? You can take yourself off mute and say, because I don't always get to see the chat. I guess I can try. Anybody know what was the percentage that was going up? And I'll give you one little clue. It was not atheism or agnosticism. What was going up?
It's non-denominational, like one-off churches, right?
Actually, no.
Mega churches.
Say that again.
Mega church, non-denominational mega churches.
No, that was not it. They're recognized as organized religion.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It is, well, becoming members of organized religious institutions is going down, or the highest percent. What's going up is those who identify as spiritual. And the spirituality is still very much from the concept of a triune God. It is still very Anglo-Saxon, you got to admit, it is still very Christian centered in the sense of the spiritual connection and the spirituality. People are finding their spirituality in what? What are some examples of where people are finding their spirituality? And it's not really negative stuff.
Meditation. Those kind of practices. Yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Mindfulness.
Mindfulness practices. We'll put that with the meditation. Good job. Think physically also where people are finding spirituality.
Nature.
Say that again.
Hiking. Nature, hiking.
Nature and hiking.
Service, doing things.
That's Priscilla, isn't it? I can't see everybody. That's Priscilla. Service. Yep. Gyms. Orange Theory. Cafes that have flexible meeting spaces. When we started with the individual practices, the meditations and so forth, that's being safe for people because they're not getting the judgment. That's why they've really grown into those personal practices. And they're coming from, I'm going to say, because I know OPMH, I've been a Presbyterian all my life. I know lots of different congregations. There's congregations out there that totally welcome meditation practices and all this kind of stuff. But there are people who have assumed, they heard it once, they're done, that, oh, that's not Christian. So then they find these practices that you just identified because they offer, one, I think they are very grounding and authentic for people, but two, they don't then have to encounter judgment. These individualized notions of spirituality. And then we moved and we shifted and we talked about finding it in nature, finding it outside, finding it in community of Orange Theory or exercise. It's community. Still, the rise of spirituality is finding community. And it was lifted up with Priscilla, the service, because it's with the purpose. Now, as Christians, I think we know how vital those spiritual practices are in being faithful. And I think I know how essential it is that it is vital that we recognize the gifts and the opportunities of what's inside with one another as well as outside with one another. Community-based things. Those are principles that are the foundation of our Christianity. How have we started missing amplifying that, like making it very clear? Because I'm so old now as a Presbyterian, I think I have assumed people would understand it. But our baseline religiosity, if we need to be clear within ourselves, but let's be clear, do we have to say that? It might be too scary for other people. The baseline is we are more equipped than ever to actually be Christian evangelists, especially being a more, OPMH yourselves, you are a highly equipped congregation that know how to engage with practices of meditation and prayer, engage with walks of community and creation, and offer those spaces that recognize the spirituality within it. We are more equipped than ever these days as modern and progressive, and when I say progressive, I do not mean political, I mean adaptive faith practices. We are more equipped than ever to actually be Christian evangelists. Now go ahead right now and just write in your notes what bothered you with that one sentence. As members of a church, we are more equipped than ever to be Christian evangelists. And I promise we're going to have a talk back time. Back to what was lifted up about acts of service. The realities of today is that people can call them issues. People have called them sins. What I want to offer to you of our theology and of our Reformed tradition, this is about the spiritual scarcity that's going on today. When we say issues, we assume then there's a quick fix solution for an issue. But when we're going to name democracy as an issue, that's not a quick fix solution. When we're going to name racism as an issue, that's not a quick fix. When we're going to name education, the state of public education in America, that's not a quick fix. When we're going to name the fact that for generations, the economic divide has been growing, even though there's a growth in the middle class, but the demographics of race and ethnicity and education, it is growing greater, the divide, the gap. As Christians and wanting to not be afraid to tackle these issues, we need to make sure we are coming to the table from a lens of recognizing this as spiritual scarcity for today. Because our faith grounds us in a concept and a relationship that is out of abundance in the midst of scarcity or in the midst of the sins. And I will share a little bit also of how there's that link for me around sins and scarcity. What we are about as a presbytery is we truly want to make sure you have access and time to discern tools and best practices so that as a congregation, you are growing spiritually, financially, solubility, even with people. But we want to say there's a 4D reality of what is growth in a congregation, because truly it's about your impact and reach with one another and that's around you and outside of you. And when we say outside of you, I'm still limiting my brain, but I don't think it's the only way. I am limiting my brain of what it means physically. And OPMH, your sacred plot, man, it's limited, right? Like you can't change much of any of that. So the good news is you don't have to worry about a redevelopment property. We've got congregations right now during this pandemic, and they, lost huge renter users during the pandemic, right? And they now have these big empty spaces in their congregations. They've started looking at that very differently. Maybe they don't even need that particular space right now. What does it mean, right? You guys, you're going to focus in a different way. You can't change the building plot. So then what is the gift of that then pushes you to have to think outside of just the plot? We want to support our congregations so that you are growing with impact and reach. Here is our mission statement as a presbytery, sent by the triune God to be agents of salvation, reconciliation, and justice. We empower and challenge our congregations to be missional, pastoral, and prophetic. We don't go real hard as to define specifically how you're going to do that, because we want you all to engage and come with your authentic identity around being missional, being sent out, being sent out. That is a main part of it, being sent out. Pastoral, recognizing, oh Lord, my God, recognizing what it means to tend to and tend with. You have those systems already within your congregation. And sure enough, for all of us during the pandemic, the pastoral arc of being church, being people together, it has been phenomenal. The way we have witnessed congregations adapting, even going back to old school ways of phone tree connections and making sure we're checking in on one another. And prophetic. It's not just the pastor preaching pulpit's responsibility to be prophetic. We are Presbyterians, the priesthood of all believers. We have a mandate, and Lord knows the prophetic witness is to share the good news of the gospel. All right, before we go into some of the terms, I will stop screen sharing just for a little bit and open this up. Maybe if people want to, any thoughts or questions from just my introduction. So framing of some terms from the introduction that I just started with you, I want to make sure that you can start where I'm coming from. And they may not be how you've always defined it or worked from. And I want to offer that this is what we are seeing happening and how these elements are coming together. Christian Evangelists. Whoop, whoop. Now, Lee and I are from the South. Let me be very clear. Priscilla, oh, she knows where we're from. She's from there too. Jacksonville, Florida, Southern Christianity, all the way. Presbyterians, tried and true. There's a tainted witness around evangelism, right? There's a tainted discoloring of being an evangelist. And it is personally my mission for moderate to progressive Christians that we really come authentically with what it means for me to be an evangelist. And I want to share with you, for about 5 years in this presbytery, I was what we call the Concierge Minister, where I was in the community, predominantly where I live in South Arlington, and I was meeting up with other pastors in our presbytery or lay leaders, and we were doing practices on the streets. And we took the easy ones, like when it was Ash Wednesday, we just set up shop right there at the metro station, or right there on the corner of George Mason Boulevard and Columbia Pike. And we offered ashes for Ash Wednesday. And people said things like, I haven't gone to church, but I love this ritual. I didn't know that I could do this, even though I don't go to church anymore. Or laity saying, well, don't you have to be ordained? Actually, in our tradition, this ritual blessing, no, you do not have to be ordained to give out ashes. We offer and mark a place. We were sharing the good news that God is with you, okay? And I think that started to give us this space of realizing it's still awkward. Oh my gosh, it's so awkward. It's so interesting and awkward. And all it took was a total stranger coming up to me and saying, can I have this? Just take that in. Now, I didn't start saying, well, let's get on the corner every day. I did not institute it. Do you understand? I did not institute the moment. What I did is I just started meeting people or spaces where they are at. And I truly did encounter statements like, gosh, if I knew that there were more ministers like you, I'd go to church. I am the most typical traditional Presbyterian ordained minister there is. Like, this is like, I said, there are actually several of us, but I bet it's been hard to trust. I bet it's been hard to figure out how to start. In community where there is so much brokenness and scarcity, people are tired of feeling judgments. They don't even feel it maybe necessarily in themselves. They're feeling it in all this universe. We know, we've seen the stats, we've heard the stories. We know the rise of depression and anxiety. There is this ominous, negative, sinful presence of judgment that is permeating into the lives of God's people. That's a general arc statement, and it is real. And so what does it mean to witness that because of my faith, I recognize it is imperfect, and because of my faith, I recognize that there is abundance and love. And when I am scared, I have practices and I have a people that I go to for that assurance. That's evangelism. That's evangelism. And if you don't believe me, 2022 for Ash Wednesday, I have said this every time, I am more than welcome to host you with me, and we will do one 30-minute, an hour session of standing outside somewhere offering ashes. Okay. Good news. Here you go. I bet you were like, well, what is the good news? Guess what? Everybody has a different answer. Because if you were to try and sum up the Bible, if you were to try and sum up life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, what do you say? I gave a little scriptural reference. You can write that down, go to it later, glean from it what connects with you. But truly, it's around summing up the Gospels. It's this notion that Jesus is the summation of the Old Testament and into the New. It's the summation of the purpose of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is what we proclaim in our communion, ritual, and language all the time. And I think that's what's important for us as Christians. We don't just have a book. We have a living word. And we don't just have a test. What we have is a relationship that is out of a ritual of communion that is very physical, very relational, and woven together with some liturgy so that we have substance with it. How would you explain good news to yourself out of your Christian tradition? Why don't you start writing that down a little bit? So when you are equipping yourself to be an evangelist, a disciple of Jesus Christ, we have to make sure we do have a full toolbox. I do wish I could tease Andy right now, my brother-in-law. The fact is, my sisters and I, we grew up with our father always in the tool shed, always. And it was a carport and a tool shed. And in our house, that meant all of us were in there together. My sisters and I, we grew up with a lot of tools. We grew up having to know how to change our oil and change a tire before we were allowed to go get our driver's license. We could not be afraid of the tools. Do I remember all of them? No. Do I think I can change the oil now? No. Thankfully, I also have an electric car, so I'm not going to try it. But do we also know that I'm not going to be afraid to ask for tools? I think the best part as to why we have children and multi-generations in our congregations is if we are not actively always adapting and how we are equipping our children with the faith practices and language of our faith, then why are we expecting them to just show up to church when they're older? Some of us probably took gap years from church. Right? We took gap years from church. And then we have this judgment notion that we don't know enough to understand what we're supposed to be saying or doing or so forth. And I'm only talking about really this generation of communities that sometimes have been done with church. I'm not talking about the ones who have never come to church. In this area, the DMV, let's be honest, most people have had a relationship with an institutional religion at some point. Because we're like drawn to institutions. That's why we're here in the DMV. So the fact is, it is not hard to truly, wonderfully, sacred times connect with somebody's faith experience or story. We do go back to those first experiences that we enjoyed about church, or we enjoyed about moments of the rituals and the practices. One of my favorite times when I'm in person and working with small groups and churches. And so this is one of our true guinea pig moments. I'm just going to go through this list, but I really would like some volunteers. As you see this list, I would love for some volunteers to be able to share maybe one response to any of these. I love Priscilla. Priscilla's given us some good words. Okay, the tools are, sure, you could have your base bookcase, but that's not what you're going to encounter and pull out when somebody's sharing with you, oh my gosh, you go to church. They're not going to say, oh, what do you read? They're going to say, wow, you really believe in that? Wow, is your church friendly? You go to church around here? Gosh, I mean, I bet it's really like professional, right? So in order to get the job done as disciples and sharing the good news, we each have to have something in our back pocket. What is your faith elevator story? What would be your story as to why you even bother to still be a nerd and go to church? Why? Why do you stay? What are your how-tos? This might be the second conversation, but what are your how-tos of being a faithful person? Or if they even say, you're really a Christian? Believe me, my sister and I, we have gotten that many times. Again, not enough people are around very boring Presbyterians, I will say that. Because people will say to my sisters, all right, we love to dance together. My sister and I, we live in Arlington. Yeah, we're going to go meet up for a pint somewhere. And people will say, you're allowed to do that? Like, friends, our how-tos is that we are in community. And my sisters and I, and with our mom, when we get together, we're totally talking about church every time. Like it's ridiculous. Our mother also works in a church. Priscilla, she started working at Riverside right now. Our mother now works at a church. What are your how-tos? What's your why of being a Christian? You don't have to explain the negative stuff. I want you to explain the positive stuff. My why for being a Christian truly is not everybody gets this experience. When I used to live for 3 months in Indonesia, and I lived with a Muslim family for a month, and they were very devoted to their practices of faith. Every evening, when it was time for evening prayer, Ibu Anwar, the matriarch of the house, she would say, Tara, it's time for me to go pray to my God. It's probably time for you to go pray to your God too. This sacred connectional respect it was for the practice of prayer. I got closer into my Christian identity by being with the other that was fully respecting the practices that we shared. I came away, one of my reasons of why I'm a Christian is because I recognize the profound connection, embrace, vulnerability, and freedom of prayer. And I do like the way it's been taught and organized and the differences in practices with my Christian tradition. What do you do with your faith? What are the things that you enjoy doing? We so often feel we've got to make disclaimers, but what would it mean if you led with the gifts, the strengths, the opportunities? We're going to go into breakout rooms, just one by one. And I would like for you all to practice a little bit as to what does it mean to do and share one of these tools with each other. Are there any, I'll put this in the chat box. Are there any questions before I break you out into groups? And also, again, just want you to remember, these are not about perfect answers, okay? Except that one, my faith elevator story is, it's an easy one for me to share because I practice it a little bit. So, but very ironically, my sisters and I grew up with a Sunday school teacher that looked just like the white, blue-eyed Jesus that we saw everywhere, including he came to church in jeans and leather sandals and had long, wavy brown hair and a beard. Later, as we grew up, his name is Randy Williford. But as kids, that was frickin' Jesus. I mean, super tall, super skinny. And my mom shared with us when we got older that we would come home saying, oh yeah, Jesus was our Sunday school teacher today. Like we would say this over and over. And our parents were very involved with church. And so they always hosted also a monthly Bible study at our house, and Jesus would come to the Bible study. And so there was just this great fluid reality of something that was so normalized. Like Randy Williford was this long-haired white hippie dude, right? That was Jesus for us as kids growing up. I think what's important now in the arc of that story is Randy also was a gay man, and growing up in the church then and in the South, and he still loved his parents so much that he would come to church. And he ended up also being one of my 6th grade teachers because he was a science teacher. But then he also lived with and died of AIDS. And by the time I was a sophomore in high school, and a piece for me in that is to say, my mom she was invited to speak at his funeral. And my mom started it with, my daughters knew that Jesus came to church because of Randy Williford, right? So you don't know. It's got a huge emotional arc in the story. It's a real relationship, but that's because that's what we did, right? So my faith story is you never know what's planted during Sunday school. But you better have Sunday school. Or you better have engagement with children in church in a way that's meet them where they at. I mean, Randy didn't have a lot of rules, but boy, I loved the way he could tell a Bible story, right? So that's my faith story. Okay, so I think everybody's back, and hopefully people found grace-filled friendships as you're navigating, practicing some evangelism, sharing. This is something, just to let you know, that I like to spend a 20 to 30 minute period with small groups on when I come in and work with churches around this. When you guys are embarking on a listening campaign, I just want you to consider maybe listening for those faith elevator stories that people are sharing when they're doing a listening campaign. I know there's scripted questions that are really focused and important probably, but I want you to also hear multi-dimensional, what are some spiritual practices that you're hearing when people are naming, for you, the answers to these questions. Now, no surprise, I'm probably not going to have time to do the whole thing. So when I start moving through this, it's just to share with you, again, we'll make sure that you have these terms. Spiritual disciplines, we talked through some of those. I would love for you to give yourselves credit and start writing out a list of your practices and rituals. I think that's really special and an opportunity of what it means to be equipped, know what's in your toolbox and how you're carrying that. And then make sure you get your partner to kind of talk it through. What is my list? What does that look like? I've started naming this a couple times, but when people want to, good Christians want to fix things. And we're talking about the scarcity that is pervasive in life, right? And we're talking about when this much scarcity is going on, where we're seeing consistent patterns of brokenness, of death-tending practices, of lives not being considered and valued, and decisions and how decisions are being made with weapons and with policies or with words and actions. This truly is, for me, a pervasive presence of the absence of God, where people are assuming already instead of the abundance, where people, and we have assumed it's too complicated to fix, so we just need to focus on ourselves sometimes, but the absence of grace or the absence of forgiveness, the absence of willing to reconstruct practices. First, you've got to dismantle the wrong ones and reconstruct and rebuild the ones that can give this space for listening, for forgiveness, for the exceptions, and for the, I want to say, acceptance of feeling the grace. It is critical thinking, and we are really smart people. As Christians, we could identify now these moments that truly have been cultivated out of scarcity, and we know that there is abundance. And so we come with a toolkit with our spiritual practices. And yeah, I want to say confront the scarcity mindset. This is straight out of Britannica. My mom's going to be so proud I'm still using this. We have doctrines, and people will use terms orthodoxy, people will use traditional, old, fine. What I want to say is this particular doctrine is incredibly vibrant. To be able to witness through a notion of the body of Christ, because all humans have access to this God. All humans have access to this abundance. We don't need to say, what's the best way in your mindset to maybe share with somebody what it means to have access to this God? It's going to be through the relationship. It's not going to be through a doctrine. It's going to be through the relationships. So in our relationships, we need to be about naming what is community for us and what is our purpose and our role in community. There's a pretty old book. It's Community, the Structure of Belonging by Peter Block. And I'm going to lift up another quote from him a little later, but this is about encouraging a shift in our way of thinking about community. So we bring about the qualities of an authentic sense of belonging. That's right back to where that spirituality rise is going in our American system, because they're belonging, right? They get a sense of belonging with a purpose. And I want to connect that community for us is the body of Christ, right? Like that's where we're wanting to work the creative arcs, and we want to work with the bridges together. So I want for you all to get to celebrate how you're going to check in with each other and equipping one another with your tools. What do you buy from in order to be tooled up as a Christian evangelist? And very importantly, how do we keep updating our tools, right? Again, back to what I offered earlier, the mission, the purpose of discipleship, to share the good news, that is very old and it is still very relevant. How we go about doing it, how we work with and practice and utilize our tools, that has to be always an adaptive conversation. That has to be a relevant and constant opportunity of checking in with one another and what's working. It's important, it was sharing in the small group that I was in, that it's this great practice that people have of coming on to session, I learned, and that you give your faith story. It's really important that you give yourself the time, and I just want to say the beautiful opportunity to really understand for yourself what is that, we call it an animating story, that really reflects the joy, the purpose, the grace of your faith. And I was excited, and when I've talked with other groups, we have so many elders that rotate in and out of session, and they never had to write a statement of faith except way back when they were confirmed, even if they did go through confirmation. And let us be clear, that whole process is wonderfully, beautifully updated now. Thanks be to God. Because when I went through confirmation, that's when I first was told, well, it's all women's faults because of Eve. What? And there was no exegetical work done on that at all. And that was from church leadership. Well, God is good all the time, because I obviously still stayed in line with my calling and my purpose. And as a woman, I am now a faithful leader in the church and ordained, I'd like to say. So the fact is, we have to make sure that we're always updating and showing all the generations that we worship with that our faith statement does also adapt with our tools. I mean, it's supposed to. We grow up. Now, here is where I want to offer my leadership at another time, but I know several of you in OPMH, and I don't know if several of you in this class have been doing it, but getting to work with voice, it is a chance that they teach us and push us how to also do this practicing evangelism, but in a very particular lens, I like to say. Community organizing training is one of the best tools I have ever been equipped with in ministry. And that happened while I was in seminary. And it's because it taught me how to be an active listener to what's going on and to also actively listen with direction. And relational meetings, you guys are going to do listening sessions within your congregation, but how would you do that outside with one another? We have churches that when they have been going through discernment process of what is their role or relevancy in their community outside of their building, or when they have been deciding and trying to discern what to do with their property or their building, what they do is they do an outside listening campaign. And they've cultivated questions or they've cultivated their faith stories, and they work off of one-to-one engagement and relational meetings. And those of you who have gone through IAF training, you know what this is, and I bet you're still scared. Let's be honest, it will always be awkward. It will always be awkward. Doesn't mean it's bad. Just like my invitation to come and do Ashes with me, 2022, when it's Ash Wednesday out on the street, it's still awkward for me. And there's a reason I don't do it alone. Hello. Awkwardness is better with others, 2 by 2. That's a biblical foundation right there. So relational meetings, it's not necessarily one-to-ones, but it is, you can also start with 2-to-ones, right? It's about the discipline of listening and recognizing that when you listen to someone's story with direct questions, and direct questions means you're getting to the story, not judgment, but with direct questions, what is sparked in me when I am listening to this other? What am I learning about that animated my questions or my faith story or my concerns for this community or my hopes for this community? So we're not going to have time to now do this breakout space. What I want to share, thanks so much. People are leaving. See, church still happens. Okay, so what I want to share is this concept that we're in the church, usually behind the walls, and we're trying to put our ears out there, right, to hear what's going on. But we want to stay organized within our systems, you know, in order to maybe get it, I don't know, more organized. Or the point is, you've got to break out of that. We have congregations that practice and they break up into small groups, and it's not the whole worshiping community. It's a designated, set apart time and space for people of the congregation. But once a month, for like a 3 or 5 month series, they worshiped out in the community. They had a purpose and a direction of listening, of witnessing. What were they observing and what were they sharing? They were meeting different people, trying to see, what does this space look like while we're inside this building? Did I meet people who didn't even know that the church was open, but they just knew it was an old church building that must be on the historical tour, right? It's actually a living building. It has a lot of vitality in it. It's going on. There are congregations that have practiced that. Again, not the whole worshiping community. Worship is still going on, but you've set apart some time. And this is when you would have in your back pocket, what's a childhood experience of faith? What does faith mean to you? What is your joy-filled moment of faith, right? And then when you're asking that question of someone, hey, I actually attend this church here. I've been here over a couple of times, but I've actually never been outside during 11 o'clock this time. What brings you down this sidewalk, you know? And then what are you hearing that's sparking inside of you? But if we're only staying, you know, just what you see in this picture, we're not giving our authentic self either out in the community. Like if we've only just put our ear out, we're not risking enough for someone to think that it's going to be worth their time. Our whole selves have to be out there. Again, I just want to reiterate the relational meeting opportunity. It's a beautiful, complicated, hard, wonderful, energizing thing. And it's something that we do together. And it's something that we do organize about. I don't just toss you out there to go do it. We talk it through. So as you start to look at this, I want to offer, and again, we'll send this out, focus on the Jesus encounters. Like, where do you see the tools and the practices happening in Scripture? How do you see those foundational opportunities? How do you see these animated in these stories? One of them is the feeding of the 5,000. We've got a great Bible study for that. One of them is the whole litany of when I was naked, you clothed me. When I was hungry, you fed me. And I totally just blinked on what was the other one. If people remember their Bible, what? Those are, sorry. The woman who confronts encounters Jesus. And I love to play with this story of saying this is when someone from the outside confronted the religious institution. And when she says Jesus, but even the dogs get the crumbs from it, Jesus had to shift. The institution had to shift and go, oh my gosh, you're right. It's about all of us, not just what I was sent here to do, but it's everything. So pay attention to what's heading up. As we go out, know who y'all are. Again, get those tools in your back pocket because they will know you by your love. I'm lifting up for us. These are some basic tools. And I noticed that in my bank, Old Presbytery Meeting House has not done a church assessment tool. And if I'm wrong about that, please correct me. But we don't have it in the Presbytery office. This church assessment tool, this is your mirror. It supports congregations to organize around what they think, what any assumptions are. It supports congregations to recognize what shows up as priorities, and then how does that really match to what you were thinking. It supports congregations to show where your strength and vitality is, kind of like strength finders in one sense. I love this tool. It really helps someone like me who sees connections everywhere and I'm just ready to try everything. It helps me focus. It helps me center around what we can truly spend our time investing in, and maybe 5 years later we can do this. So I would highly encourage you. It's just a couple $100. The Presbytery provides the interpreters for you, and we meet with the leadership teams as designated by the session or the pastors with the session. Mission Insight is a data tool. It can just show you the projections of housing and development and education, and also religion, 5 years out, 10 years out, 20 years out. Mission Insight, so to say, we've used it with congregations that are looking at redevelopment, and they wanted to build a gym to start a youth corps organization. And the data shows that they're not going to grow in numbers of youth and families with young children. The area is actually going to grow for a very multi-generational and older adult. And they realized, oh, okay, well then we got to go listen and see what's going on. So it was really helpful. That is free. We provide that to you. And again, our Presbytery has coaches to support short-term goals of discernment with that information. All right, back to, I'm going to close, I think, with this. Yes. Back to community, the sense of belonging. Block says the key task for leaders in bringing about this shift is to create structures for authentic engagements. creating a context that nurtures an alternative future, one based on gifts, generosity, accountability, and commitment. What if you named that as abundance? Initiating and convening conversations that shifts people's experience, which occurs through the way people are brought together and the nature of the questions used to engage them. That discernment of your direct key questions for any kind of listening engagement, that is really important. And coach training, we call those the powerful questions. You want to get to the direct time of authentic sharing, and people are more willing than you think. The active listening and paying attention. What does it mean for a church to truly organize themselves to reflect that they are paying attention to what is going on in the world today? If you have a banner that states something that's really important and prophetic, make sure your actions are aligning up with the prophetic banner. If you have a book study that is giving people the spiritual practices and disciplines to really engage and reframe their thinking about something as it intersects with faith and politics, then also line that up with some relationships that can give people a chance to encounter resurrection, myself in the church, to encounter what it means to let go of death-tending practices and policies and be part of something that is resurrected, of new life. That is about your congregational growth of impact and reach. God is doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you perceive it?